Hi, it's Chris Thompson from eResearch, and we are here at PDAC 2026 with Mark Selby of Canada Nickel. Hi, Mark.
Great to see you, Chris.
I like to start with a story. About 2 years ago, I remember seeing a presentation from your company. I was sitting at a table. The guy at the end of your presentation looked over at me and said, you know, love Mark, love the project, but it's never going to be built. It's too low grade. Right?
Yeah.
And it's great to see things are moving forward. So maybe you can explain why, even at the grade it is, why this project is going to move forward.
Yeah, no, that's always the biggest pushback, you know, and again, I've been in nickel now most of my 25 years in mining. I was head of strategy at Inco and had a pretty large global nickel portfolio at that time. The thing people don't understand, again, we're used to Sudbury, right, and high grades, and Australian investors are used to Cambolda, where it's 3-4% nickel. You know, the reality is you need to make money at the end of the day, right? And so and you need scale, right? So the last nickel deposit that had more than 1 million tons of nickel at more than 1% grade was Voisey's Bay in 1992.
Yeah.
The two biggest discoveries that are quote high grade, greater than 1%, are about 250,000 tons of nickel. We're a 3.5 million ton nickel market going to 5 million tons. If we want nickel from somewhere other than Indonesia, you need multi-million ton resources, and they are in these lower grade deposits. Now the great thing with these low grade deposits is now we have big milling equipment, we have big trucks, and so you know we're basically mining $30 a ton rock. It costs us about $12 a ton to do it. So we have 60% operating margins over the life of mine. You know, most mining projects, you know, would kill for those kind of grades, and we do that over a 40-year life, right?
That's kind of software margins.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like 60% margins is what you see in software these days.
100%,
right?
and yeah, it's low grade. We only get 40% of the nickel, but all the math, and we work with Senko, who's one of the really good engineering firms that gets things built on time, on budget, and so it's just a new you know, again, it's like a Cisco and Detour, you know, 20 years ago when the Cisco started building Malartic. It's like, oh, it's less than a gram a ton, right? Detour was even lower grade, right? And then Agnico ended up paying, you know, $5, $6, $7 billion for both assets, right? So nickel is just going through the same shift that gold and copper, and we're just kind of at the pointy end of the spear. And it'd be one of those things like a Cisco. Now people looking back think, oh yeah, no, that was a no-brainer.
You can make money. So I guess other advantages is you're in a place where infrastructure is great, and also it's not just one deposit. You've got a whole region that you're looking at.
No, 100%. So, you know, again, these deposits, if you tried to find one of these in the Ring of Fire that's 500 miles from the nearest piece of infrastructure, it would never get into production. But we're literally next to a highway. You know, we'll extend a rail line right in the project site just north of Timmins. So we get all the infrastructure. You got a bunch of communities. We get people who are going to drive to and from work every day, and communities that are really supportive of mining. And then to your point, you know, what was even more exciting for me, I worked on another project, Dumont in Quebec, and that was one deposit. We figured out that the geophysics gives you about 70% of the answer in terms of these type of deposits. So our VPXD Bulch and I in 2021 used the free geophysics data from the Ontario and Quebec government and tuned the map with Dumont and Crawford, and we put 20 plus deposits popped up around Timmins. We've successfully drilled 18 of them. We have a 98% hit rate now. We've got almost 250 kilometers of drilling. We have 8 separate resources, and we now have more nickel in the ground than Sudbury.
And so also you have another deposit which you may think is actually going to be bigger than Crawford, right?
Oh, we have several. Like, again, the fact that the geophysics does give you 70% of the answer. We've now drilled a bunch of these off. It's not just on the geophysics, but you know, just when you look at the amount of overburden, the strip ratio on the resources that we have. So Crawford's 2.3 to 1. It's about 35 meters of lake bottom from a glacial lake that existed 10,000 years ago. You know, a lot of these deposits have less than one strip ratio, you know, anywhere from half to 2/3 of the overburden. So yeah, you just do the math and they're going to be that much. You know, we always say inside Crawford will be our first project, but it's not our best project. So.
And the other thing that people talk about is the CapEx, right? And I saw you present recently, and it's a $2.5 billion CapEx, but you've outlined how you're going to get to that
Yeah, no, that's one of the things investors, like in terms of Canadian critical minerals projects, you should really, really take a look, because there's so many government funding programs that effectively give you, in our case, effectively give you, a free carry, from where we are today. And so it's a $2 billion capex, but it's a $2.5 billion funding package with cost overrun and financing costs, which, $1.5 billion debt. We already have 2 LOIs from Export Development Canada, another big Canadian agency. And we've got export credit agencies lined up, that are interested in doing the rest. On the equity side, and this is the big upside, is that it's a $1 billion equity check, but over $600 million. We qualify for over $600 million of refundable investment tax credits, and that's literally spend $1, file your taxes. They mail you a check for either 30 cents for critical minerals or 50 cents in our case for carbon capture and storage. We have a Samsung SDI has the right to buy 10% of the project for $100 million US. So we're solving for 300. We're working with Scotia and Deutsche Bank to sell another 10 to 20%. And then there's a whole series of government envelopes in Canada, another series of government envelopes within the various G7 countries. So you can create a capital stack where we don't have to go to the market for that big equity raise. And that's the thing that I think people just haven't really, because they haven't seen it yet, so they don't really understand, what that leverage looks like.
I got to attend one of your presentations and see it or download the presentation.
Like slide 17 in the investor deck. There we go.
So let's just talk about carbon capture for a second. Because everyone complains about mining, everyone complains about the waste, but your project, carbon capture, you're actually going to be taking carbon out of the atmosphere. Yeah,
so the nice thing, these low-grade nickel deposits, one of the benefits is they're hosted in ultramafic rock. Ultramafic rock, there are people looking at spreading it on fields in Europe, dumping it in the ocean, because it has this wonderful property where it spontaneously absorbs CO2. So we developed a process where we inject CO2 as the material's going through the mill, and just before we pump it up the tailings, we literally bubble and stir it for 3 to 6 hours, and we can store 1.5 million tons of CO2, which at the mine gate effectively gives us a net negative carbon footprint. Then we're working with a US group to inject CO2 before we mine it, working with another Australian group in terms of if you take our tailings and heat them up, you get 10 more, the rock decomposes and create 10 times more of the magic mineral that soaks up CO2.
And is this important for some manufacturers who want to have like what they may classify as clean nickel, or how does that work in the world?
Oh no, for sure. I mean, in nickel particularly, because 2/3 of global supply is now Indonesia, has a literally massive carbon, 50 to 80 tons of CO2 per ton of nickel. Environmentally, there was another tailings dam failure in Indonesia 2 weeks ago, massive fire at another plant last week, and so they want an alternative. And so not only to have an alternative, but to have an alternative with a very low carbon footprint for the high-end car makers, for European consumers, who are really concerned about carbon footprint, we're in an ideal position on that front.
And we haven't touched on chromium and all, but but it's not just nickel. You got a whole bunch of elements in there, right?
No, for sure. So in the nickel concentrate, you get cobalt PGMs, and that's pretty common with nickel. But the process that creates the nickel that can become recoverable also takes iron and turns it into magnetite. In our case, we have a significant amount of chrome. So we'll end up producing about 75,000 tons of chrome per year when we're fully ramped up. That's about 15% of North American supply, and we'll be the only North American supplier of it. And chrome is used in a bunch of very high-end alloys. Aerospace doesn't work without chromium. SpaceX, all those things don't work without chromium. And so, to be in that position, to be able to that preferred North American supplier, again, is pretty amazing.
And who are some of your partners? You got some big investors in your company as well.
Yeah. So again, your question about your intro in terms of this will never work. However, we have Agnico Eagle, who's come in. We have Anglo American, who's come in. Samsung SDI were one of their only mining investments, and then one of the local First Nations communities has taken 20 million of their own capital and invested in the company as well. So they're pretty smart mining companies, pretty smart companies, right? So they've done their homework, and the math works.
And so, you're pretty aggressive on production forecasts. You're looking at maybe coming to production in 2028.
We'd like to. So ideally, by the end of this year, our sort of near-term goal is have permitting, financing, and enough engineering and log leads in place, so that we're in a position to break ground by year end.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's fast timeline when it comes to mining projects.
Yeah.
you're ready, set, go then.
Yeah, we went from fifth drill hole to feasibility study in just over 4 years, and we've been waiting for some of these funding programs to get in place because again, I have most of my net worth in the company, and I'd rather have take advantage of some of these government funding programs than dilute further. So we will get there in the end, and it's exciting. I was just up the street at the Timmins. And Timmins now with Tony McCooch with Discovery Silver getting the rest of the thing. Timmins is really turning into a tremendous mining camp once again.
I mean, another little story. I play shinny, and there was a guy in the dressing room, and we were talking about mining. He said, "Oh, I'm from Timmins. There's a big project." They're all excited that there's new projects coming on board. Yeah. So I said, "Yeah, I knew all about it." I talked to him about it, and he was like. And he's super excited that another new project is starting up in that community. Yeah.
Oh, no. I couldn't ask for a better location to develop a project. So, we're really, really lucky.
Well, great. Well, I appreciate you coming by and your time, and look forward to seeing the news the rest of the year.
No, we'll definitely be keeping in touch.